Hello, everyone. Hi. Ooh, bright lights. How's everybody doing today? Having a great time? Awesome. Good to see you all here. Super excited to do this presentation for you today. We are going to dig into a very timely and relevant topic of election security. But fear not, we're going to keep it very apolitical today. Hopefully, I'm not going to make anyone upset. But if you see something during this presentation that challenges you or makes you feel some kind of emotion, try to identify where that's coming from, because we're going to really dig into election interference. We're going to touch on malign influence and a little bit of cyber threats as well. So first, I just want to say that while I was putting together this presentation, I was reflecting on my life as a voter growing up in Texas. For my first election, I think I was 18, I remember voting a straight party ticket, just like my parents told me to do. Of course, throughout my life, my political beliefs have definitely changed. I'm not sure my parents would be too happy about that. We don't talk about politics anymore. But it got me thinking, because now I'm a parent. And now I'm raising a 14-year-old and a 15-year-old who will be voting in the next presidential election after this one. Does anybody in here have kids or have teenagers? Okay, so if you have a teenager, you know how scary that thought is, letting your teenager decide something very important about the country in the next election. It got me thinking about how our kids will vote in the future. What will elections look like for them? And I want my kids to be able to vote in elections that are free of coercion, that are not being manipulated by foreign adversaries. And I don't want my kids to grow up in a country feeling dismayed about voting in an election. Dismayed meaning, oh, my vote doesn't really matter. Or why should I even try? Look at the state that we're in. So I want them to be excited about it. I want them to exercise their right, feeling informed of their options without influence by disinformation and lies. So suddenly, election security is personal, as it is for over 2 billion voters going to the polls this year. So let's dig in and start kind of an overview of what's going on around the world. Now, this presentation is not strictly focused on the US. I want to kind of zoom out and take you on a global trip on what's going on with elections around the world. This year is a critical year for elections, with over 60 elections being held in 2024 for over 2 billion voters. So that's a quarter of the world's population heading to the polls during a time when democratic values are in decline and conflict threatens our values, threatens our free and fair elections in many countries. During a time when authoritarianism is on the rise and foreign adversaries begin to harness new technology to target our systems, to disrupt, influence, and interfere in democratic elections. So today, we will examine the convergence of these threats, which includes cyber, geopolitical, and influence operations. And so we'll focus in on the US, but let's take a little survey of what's going on here. Now, this is a list of national direct elections happening in 2024. Many of them have already happened. And keep in mind, only about 75% of these countries are having free and fair elections. But that's not all. Next year is a big year for elections as well. So keep this in mind. We're not just focusing on US election that's about to happen. We're also talking about elections that are going to take place in the very near future, especially we're looking at UN Security Council elections, Australia and Canada, as well as many important allied nations like Germany, Japan, Ireland, and more. Now, before we dive into explanations of threats to democratic elections, let's kind of level set with some definitions first. Let's all kind of get on the same page and understand what we are talking about. Is there a screen? Oh, yeah. Okay. So let me go back one. Okay, you can see the definitions here. Perfect. So democratic elections need to be competitive, periodic, inclusive, and definitive. And it says here, a quote that I really like is, democratic elections are not merely symbolic. They are competitive, periodic, inclusive, definitive elections in which the chief decision makers in a government are selected by citizens who enjoy broad freedom to criticize government, to publish their criticism, and to present alternatives. So notice the bullet points. That's what the goal is, and that is what we're protecting. Protecting elections is not just about safe processes. I know in our industry, many of us work in cyber threats and work to protect our organizations from cyber threats, which is great and very important. But it's not just about protecting those digital processes. It's about securing our people, our way of life, our communities, and our voices. And that means everyone, every person. So let us not allow the purpose behind election security get lost in the mission of election security. Unfortunately, what we're seeing right now around the world, and this is not a new trend, democracy is in decline for the 18th consecutive year. You may have heard democracy referred to as an experiment, and it really is. We're still trying to figure out, can we make this experiment work? The breadth and depth of deterioration in democracy around the world last year in 2023 was extensive. We saw political rights and civil liberties diminished in 52 countries, while only 21 countries made improvements. Flawed elections and armed conflict contributed to the decline, endangering freedoms and causing severe human suffering. Now, again, remember, this is about human life and civil rights. The regimes of China, Russia, and other authoritarian countries have gained enormous power in the international system, and freer countries have seen established norms challenged and fractured. More than 20% of the world's governments today engage in transnational repression. This is a serious concern, not just for those people that live in those countries, but we should all be concerned about this trend globally. Now, globally, it is increasingly rare for an authoritarian to come to power via a coup, which I thought was pretty surprising. Instead, sorry, where was I? Okay, so instead, democracies in decline usually experience a slow but steady erosion, which rang true for me as I researched US politics, and I was a political science major. That seems to be the trend in the United States as well. Now, keep in mind that this process is incremental and episodic. Each step is only partial. So sometimes it's going, oh, that's cringe, that doesn't look good for our country or our government processes, but it doesn't look like failure because it is so partial and incremental. And there can be intermediate moments of stability or equilibrium as these things are happening. So keep your eyes open for those types of signs, and we'll also talk about what those signs are. Now, one of the gravest threats to free and fair elections throughout the world is the rise of violence, conflict, and authoritarianism. Basically, enemies of liberal democracies are accelerating their attacks in both overt and covert form. But we can't place all the blame on our adversaries. Internally, not just the United States, but our allied countries as well, we all have domestic political actors that are contributing to the decline. Democratic decline is associated with certain changes in public attitudes, vilifying members of the opposing party and spreading widespread misinformation. And there tends to be a decline in non-governmental institutions that are critical to a healthy public sphere, such as independent media, a vibrant education system, and an engaged civil society. Unfortunately, all of these symptoms of decline are present in the United States today. So let's talk more specifically about what threats we're really facing. What does this look like? How does it happen? What threats are most likely to derail free and fair elections in the near future? Today, we're going to focus on foreign influence, cyber attacks on voting infrastructure and processes, and basically we'll touch lightly on physical interference if we have time for that. But we do have limited time, so we'll continue. Now, when it comes to threat vectors, we're going to address the top two today, which is influence operations and cyber attacks. But first, we're going to tackle foreign malign influence, my personal favorite to research. What is foreign malign influence? FMI, for short, is any hostile effort undertaken by, at the direction of, or on behalf of, or with substantial support of a foreign government, with the objective of influencing through overt or covert means. This includes the use of disinformation and propaganda spread by nefarious actors. So why are we so concerned? Bottom line, we're much better at protecting election technologies and processes than we are protecting audiences from viral misinformation. People believe what they see and hear first and what they see and hear the most. I want you to remember this when you're scrolling through social media or through the news in the morning. Whether it's true or not, you have a truth bias. We as humans believe what we see and hear first and see and hear the most, which means social media is the ultimate weapon for foreign malign influence, because viral videos, disinformation, deep fakes. But you know what? I want to share with you a quote I heard last week, and I believe it was on a TV show. I can't remember what character said this, but he said, "The best lies are mostly truth." And I think that's the way most disinformation works today, is there's a lot of truth in there, but somehow they sneak in little facts, quote unquote, that are not actually true. So as you are going through your daily processes, whether you do this for work or you're just wanting to kind of protect yourself from disinformation, keep that in mind. Now, first I want to point out some ways in which Insect Group wrote in our election reports and basically predicted what was going to happen this year. And I was pretty impressed as I looked through this list. Actually, the list that you see here on the screen were forecasts. So by prediction, I'm really just playing up the word predict, of course. By prediction, I mean forecast based on previous election threats and current capabilities of the threat actors. So first off, both foreign and domestic actors will very likely use various disinformation tactics to influence the outcomes of elections. Check that box. We've already seen this happening this year. Another forecast was Russia and China are most likely to conduct I.O. targeting Western elections, especially related to divisive topics. We call those wedge topics. We've already seen this playing out already. Russia's all over it. Iranian state-sponsored influence actors will very likely conduct malign influence, seeking to shape the election, especially in relation to our support for Israel's war with Hamas. We have already seen in the news, Iranian threat actors have already been very active targeting campaigns this year. So good job on Insect Group for that prediction as well. And last but not least, a notable increase in use of machine learning, AI, LLMs, in political influence campaigns, both by domestic and foreign actors. This has also already happened in this election season, which I find interesting because a lot of times the trends that we see as we go through an election year or building up to the date of the election is we will notice a slow trickle of disinformation. A little bit here, a little bit there, and then most of it happens the month before the election. But this year has been a little more intense. So, oh, look, we've got check marks. Check, check, check. Okay, also on that previous slide, I believe there was yes, on the right-hand side, you'll see a query that you can build in the Recorded Future platform for finding this kind of information. Any reports and notes that are coming out of Instant Group are easy to find using this type of query. So feel free to take screenshots, by the way, or pictures. All right, so this screenshot, just very briefly, is just an AI content farm tracker of how there has been such a dramatic increase in use of AI and LLMs in content used in disinformation campaigns. It's a pretty dramatic increase over the past couple of years, but that's not all. We're very concerned about deep fakes, photo manipulation, combined with elements of narrative that create a very dangerous information ecosystem. We have problems with trust and transparency right now. We have a crisis of trust in authorities. When people ask, well, how do I find the right information? If you say, trust the government, they're gonna laugh, okay? So there's also a problem I see a lot is that when people start doing their independent research, but they don't know how to check sources, verify sources, and fact check. Maybe they've never learned it, maybe they haven't had to challenge themselves in that way academically, whatever the reason, people think that just because they Googled something, they can find the facts themselves. But when they go look for those facts, many of them are false. So this is the information environment we're facing right now. And I wanted to share this link with you because now we have these amazing new tools that are coming out that can detect or rate some kinds of deep fakes and manipulated audio and give a rating or scale on how likely it is to be inauthentic. So it is encouraging to see these new types of tools coming out. Use them. If you're going through the news and you see something or somebody's on Facebook trying to attack you for whatever reason, you can try to use these types of tools to double check, is this real or not? And I encourage you to check out this website. I wish I could show it to you live. As you scroll through, it's very bipartisan, apolitical, but it shows you various disinformation news pieces that are floating around that involve deep fakes and various manipulated images. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about what Russia and China are doing. First of all, we have seen some significant trends. Russia continues to be a very aggressive adversary when it comes to foreign malign influence. Russia will almost certainly attempt to exploit perceived political angst and war fatigue concerning continued support for Ukraine. Has anybody seen anything in the news about this? Russian disinformation, targeting, okay. So very prominent in the news today. Continued economic and military support for Ukraine will very likely be an issue that shapes Western elections, as it is today. It has become a major domestic flashpoint. People are very upset about why are we giving our money to Ukraine, Israel, this and that. We've got hurricanes happening, FEMA rumors and disinformation. All of this is happening right here in front of our faces, and we know that Russia is taking part in and fueling that disinformation with fake news websites, fake news articles, deep fakes, and much more. China also takes part in election interference, although they take a little step back. They're not as aggressive as Russia. really, when it comes to China, of course, it's what's in our best interest. China's always trying to determine, is there a candidate in this election that would be favorable for us? And normally, they determine that neither candidate is favorable for China. However, I don't know. I don't want to get political, but I know some political actors have recently praised President Xi Jinping and complimented him quite a lot. I was surprised about that. But you never know what the tactic is there. So China, we judge that they will very likely conduct malign influence to shape this election, although it's unlikely to engage in disruptive activities that may result in a negative impact on its own image. They're always trying to save face, deny, deny, deny. We don't get involved in other people's elections. But the truth is, we have evidence. We have found many campaigns where they are using AI, they're using deepfake images, and they're pumping that disinformation into our information ecosystem. And also I've included some queries that you can use here to kind of go, okay, what is China doing? How can we get more information and reports from INSIT Group on this? All of it is available through these types of queries. And by the way, the slide decks will be shared with you afterwards, so you'll be able to see these queries again and mimic that and build it in the platform. So when I was in INSIT Group a couple of years ago, I'd been working with our global issues team on analyzing Chinese disinformation, and we found quite a lot. And one of the things I really had to hone in on and jump in on is political cartoons. And the reason I found this so fascinating is that they love using political cartoons around the world to influence global views of the US and to influence how people see democracy in general. These cartoons are just some of the examples of what we witnessed in the last election cycle, and it still continues today. It slows down a little bit between election cycles, but in an election year, it really ramps up. Political cartoons are easy to understand. You don't even have to know English or Chinese to understand them. They use symbols, colors, and flags to convey the message that they want to convey. And I'm going to be honest, a lot of it is true. There is a lot of truth in these influence campaigns. So it's important to differentiate between disinformation and malign influence. Malign influence can influence people away from the US and towards China, influence governments, but not everything they say is false. So they are smart about that. They also have these videos that they make with Western influencers that they hire to propagate videos about why US democracy is a failure and why certain political candidates shouldn't be candidates. So they use Western scholars and so-called experts as paid consultants to create these videos criticizing Western democracy. These types of videos can be found all over social media: Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, Weibo, Douyin, so both English language and Chinese language social media platforms. And we know that they are using AI to inflame social tensions in the US today. So these are just some examples of some of the images they've created and some of the images that they want to go viral, but it doesn't always get as much traction as they'd like. And of course, we have to talk about Iran. Iranian state-sponsored influence actors will very likely conduct malign influence seeking to shape the US elections. That's what INSIT Group predicted earlier this year, and we've already seen it. We've got our government, honing in on those particular malign influence actors that are responsible for these campaigns, that are responsible for hacking emails or sending, gossip to various political parties, trying to lure them into contributing to the disinformation. So our adversaries are targeting us. We know this. It's not new, but what is new is their tactics. And this year was the year of AI. I'm sure you're all tired of hearing about AI by now, but we have a ways to go. It's getting better, it's getting more sophisticated, and we are constantly trying to come up with new tools to counteract and counter those threats. So these are also some examples of Iranian-created cartoons that were used in the last political election cycle in the US. So let's talk briefly about cyber threats. I've got a few minutes left in this presentation. And like I said at the beginning, the reason we hone in on malign influence first is because we're doing a really good job at protecting electoral systems and processes from cyber threats. Now, we're not perfect, but we know what we're doing. We've been doing this for decades now. Cybersecurity is our area of expertise. But you may be surprised to hear that ransomware is actually one of the biggest concerns in our elections this year. Or maybe you're not surprised. I was surprised by that. I thought for sure it's nation-state sponsored, very sophisticated attacks, but really ransomware threat actors know that they can make a lot of money if they can disrupt a process like an election. So ransomware tops our list of concerns this year, and we're working with state governments, local governments, election committees on protecting those processes and those systems. But we're also concerned about hacks against voter databases, hack and leak operations, like we've seen so many times in the past, espionage, attacks targeting election officials is also a very large concern. And then, of course, disruptive attacks and destructive attacks. All right. This graphic I thought was very interesting. This was a survey done where 60% of the surveyed people said they were concerned about disinformation campaigns. Then you've got phishing attacks targeting election officials, hacking of election processes and websites, and ransomware is also down there on the list. So I feel like I related to this survey a lot. I did not expect ransomware to be very high on the list, but when you think about it, there's a lot of money to be made in disruptive attacks. Now, earlier I mentioned that Russia tends to ramp up, our adversaries ramp up their influence ops right before an election. And that is because whatever you see is top of mind right before you decide to go vote. This is an example from a previous election of Russia creating fake news websites right before the election. So this is the type of behavior we're looking for. We know the domains that they're going to be trying to target and try to spin up. We know that these fake news sites look very real and very authentic. And we also know that they're using journalists that are actually professional journalists that are contributing to these campaigns. So it's harder to distinguish fake news from real news. But we know from the past what is going to happen. We're ready for it, and we're ready for the influx of AI-generated material that comes with it. I'm going to skip over this one. So what are we doing about it now? We have many organizations working together, nonprofits, NGOs, government organizations, as well as private sector intelligence companies like Record a Future, all working together to create better protection. So we're talking about, people, processes, technology, and getting to the bottom of the security problem with every single level. We also have ODNI's Foreign Malign Influence Center. So what they do is protect from the threat. They protect U.S. democratic processes and institutions from foreign malign influence. I recently got to meet with some of them and do a panel with some individuals from that organization. It's phenomenal. So if there's anybody here from the Foreign Malign Influence Center, I'm glad you're here today. We have organizations set up to try to understand it, research it, and counter it. At the state level, we are really targeting in on legislation on AI and the proper use of AI. So it's encouraging to see some of these states taking this very seriously. Some of them have already passed legislation. I know I heard in the news California recently passed some kind of legislation about it. But we can do more. So some of this seems very big. Maybe it's not in your wheelhouse. Maybe you don't do it for a job every day. But what can we do? Well, many of you are familiar with the diamond model for cyber intrusions. A couple of years ago, we wrote the diamond model for influence operations analysis. This is available in the Recorded Future platform and publicly on our website. I encourage you to download it and take a look at that. What we basically did is just took the diamond model and made some slight adjustments for malign influence. And that means instead of adversary, we call them influencer. Instead of victim, they're called audience. And you'll notice that the technical axis stays the same, capabilities and infrastructure. But what do you notice is very different about this diamond model? There's something smack dab in the middle, and that is the element of narrative. Now, narrative is the story that the threat actor is trying to tell. Whether it's true or false, it is some kind of malign influence. So by using the diamond model, you're able to kind of pick apart a campaign, identify the various elements, and look at it as a whole. Now, before the diamond model for I/O, there were various other frameworks for analyzing this type of information, but it was very piecemeal. It was just the capabilities, or just the attribution, just the victimology. So we wanted to kind of piece it all together into one whole framework. So we used the diamond model. And I mention that because we're going to be using the diamond model later in our breakout session, which is called a thought exercise on election security. I welcome you to join me there, where we're going to be using fictional election scenarios, and we're going to use the diamond model to do some red team, blue team stuff. It's going to be really fun. But we have to wrap this up. So, key takeaways. This is the biggest election year in history, 2 billion people voting in over 60 elections. So that's more practice for the adversaries, because they do practice on smaller elections where they won't be noticed as much. They test out their capabilities and tools for the bigger elections they want to target, like the US. Democracy is in decline, and our success relies on free and fair elections. So we have a purpose and we have a mission going forward. Violence and conflict and geopolitical tensions are contributing to this decline, as we see happening in the Middle East and in Ukraine. And then we are dealing with internal political factors and actors here in the US that, to be honest, make it easy on the adversaries to take advantage. We are dealing with malign influence powered by AI, and that is topping our list of concerns this year. And of course, we're always focused on cyber attacks as the adversaries are using it for disruption, espionage, and manipulation. So on that note, I want to thank you for being here today. Please join us in our election security workshop later, where you get to actually put some of this into practice and use creativity and imagination for these fictional election scenarios. Thank you so much.